Okay, so I've been reading Alfred, Professor Alfred Crosby's book, The Measure of Reality, and he's a really great writer, smooth read. Um, the quantification in Western Europe, 1250 to 1600, published in 1997, nonfiction history, Cambridge University Press, and in his chapter on music, he sort of goes over the creation of staff music out of Gregorian chanting, and that the Pope issued a whatever proclamation or whatever it is, a bull against, in I think it was in the 1300s, against music getting too um, lascivious. It was too too much too complex, and it was causing too much delight instead of like devotion, and which is kind of interesting. But the the big point that he makes so is the way time is defined in music. So in music, it's something like you don't really think about it unless you really think about like how music was created in the West. But when they created a graph for notation in the doli dola, what is it, dola fa si, whatever, do mi fa sol la or whatever it is, do fa, do dear fa, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So they at first they didn't have any measures in music, and that was also because in the written text that they were singing was all run together in the Latin. There wasn't any spacing in the wording, and and at first when people read um text, they read text out loud. They didn't read silently, and so libraries were actually really loud because everybody was just reading out loud, which is kind of weird thing to think about. But you had to be really specialized also because the Latin wording ran together, and then they started improving the writing text. And then, but when they created written music, they created also the um, um, pause. I don't know what you called in. Forgot what he called in music, but the pause is this idea that you're listening to time, because time is now just this abstract background that's objective time that you, and then the music or the notes obviously on the page, but then when you put in um, a pause, what do you even call a pause in music? I think it's called. I haven't read music for so long. I forgot. Pause in music. It's called fermata. Hold. Oh, is there a name for the fermata? But what does the symbol mean? What does the symbol mean? No. Anyway, yeah. So the big point is that so you have different kind of pauses. Caesura is a space between pause. Uh, but the but it's what's interesting about this is that in physics, the definition of time is relies on matter. So time does not exist unless you're observing matter and measuring external measure matter. But in music, that's not true. That's not how time is defined. Time can exist on its own as a pause between notes. And it's this idea of the space between notes that I emphasized in my master's thesis, because Sun Ra, there's a great quote from Sun Ra where, and I think Theolonius Monk talked about this also, but basically, it's actually I also quote John Chernoff, who studied African drumming in West Africa, and he realized that it's the space between the beats, the actual drumming sound that is more important than the actual sound itself. So you end up listening to time directly, and that becomes your measure of reality. Whereas in Western physics, um, you have to have some external measurement of matter for time to exist, and that's not how time is defined in music. And so it's a fundamental difference in perception and worldview. And when you combine that with non-commutativity, where the frequency and the time are actually complementary opposites, so then you can have negative time or negative frequency, and then time reversed um, signals or information from the future that's superluminal because you're listening to the source of time. It's the space between the notes, the pause, whatever. What is a break called in music? They just call it a rest. Yeah, it's just called a rest in musical notation. And there's so you have different rests based on the um yeah. It's just a real simple concept, but it's a totally different definition of time. So something I never really thought about, but obviously there's a big argument about what time is in physics, but in terms of music as biology, we can say time is definitely not dependent on matter existing. I mean, obviously, standard science defines music by what you listen to. Um, external definition of measuring sound, but that's not how music is. If you're just listening, you don't need notation to make music. And um, yeah, actually, a friend of mine told me this story about how the rock band, what is it? Can't even remember the name of the band, but they're banned from going to protest because the cops are afraid of them causing riots. And so they were at the RNC protest in St. Paul in 2008 at the Republican National Convention, and they showed up and they just like um made their own music with their mouths. They pretended to be the guitar, and then one guy was singing, and they sang the guitar notes, the guitar lines, since because technically they couldn't be at the protest with their instruments as a band. I think it's Rage Against the Machine. Yeah, it was Rage Against the Machine. Um, Rage Against.